Hey guys, back with another video. Having a lot of questions about where to seat your bullet and talking about how far in the case should the bullet go. So how far the bullet goes into the case will be largely determined by your reamer. So whatever reamer you choose and whatever bullet you choose will affect all that. And as you can see by my diagram, my little bullet here, but that's basically the way my bullet sits. My bullet sits right flush with the shoulder, where the inside of the neck, the boat tail goes down right to there. It doesn't go down into the case and all that kind of stuff. All that pressure I want from the case up the shoulder to the neck. That's where all the pressure goes out. If your bullet's seated way down inside the case, I don't think you're getting as good of pressure release and consistent pressure if your bullet's seated way down inside. I want it up here where all the pressure is going out. Now, as far as seating depth in itself, this bad representation is a bullet getting jumped where the bullet is not up into the rifling all the way. There's a little gap there, so it's got to fire and then launch up into the rifling. And this one here is a representation of a bullet actually touching the lands and being seated right there into the lands or right at the lands. So in my crude estimation, because I don't know how to explain things technically, I just have a feeling that this bullet here having to move forward and then engage the rifling isn't going to be as consistent as a bullet already into the rifling. So that's just what the testing is that I've found. I've tested jumping, tested jumping, and tested bullets seating right at the lands or into the lands just a little bit, and shooting this way has always been more consistent. I'm not saying you can't shoot this way. I mean, every manufacturer in America pretty much makes their ammunition to sit just like this. I don't know of any manufacturer that makes a round, just stock off-the-shelf ammo that isn't seated to where it jumps. But if you're looking for long-range accuracy, you want to get everything as consistent as possible. I believe this is the way to go. So that's the way I shoot. And I've had all kinds of questions of people asking me, well, geez, how much neck tension do you need in order to get it to hold right there? Well, I don't know if I can show you on this. I'll try to do some close-ups, but this right here is basically 10 thousandths into the lens. I mean, you can barely see through the calipers there. Just barely. I mean, it's barely into the lens. Just barely. I mean, look at the gap there. There's hardly any gap at all. That's a representation 10,000. Well, actually, it moved to 13 now, but yeah. The point is I'm not talking a great big old jam into the lens, you know, like that. No. We're just talking barely. That's why it's so critical to find your touch point, where I showed you a couple of videos ago. Find your touch point. You want to be just inside there. I recommend starting somewhere around 10 thousandths and going in and out a little bit from there, as long as you're in. So that brings up the next question, is how often do you need to adjust that? For me personally, once I find my seating depth, say it's 10, just representation, just say 10 thousandths. Say I'm 10 thousandths into the rifling. Well, I know just from all my shooting that about every 100 rounds or so, this throat will erode out approximately 2 to 3 thousandths. So then within 300 rounds, I'm going to be sitting here shooting like this. It's going to be jumping. So I want to move that bullet forward to keep it just inside. Every time I go to a match and I shoot my 100 rounds about, I come home, when I clean the barrel, I recheck my test point. And I keep that consistent every single time. Every single time I load my rifle, it's consistently the same. About 10 thousandths in. Always. So I've learned, if I keep everything the same, if my seating depth stays the same in relation to the rifling, always just barely in. If my neck tension is always the same, if my cases are bumped back, all the same, everything stays way more consistent. So you do all the testing, of course, to figure out what's perfect for your chamber, just like we figured out, you know, how tight to make your cases. That was in one of the first videos. The second one's powder testing, finding your powder. Next one, seating depth, exactly where do you want to be in your seating depth. And once you find these things, always leave it there. I've heard of guys saying they start here, and once they find their seating depth, they never change their case after that. They just leave it the same. Well, if I know that the throat erodes out and I end up shooting like this within 400 rounds, well, what's going to happen after I've shot a couple thousand rounds? Well, you're going to be jumping the bullet way the heck up here. And if you never adjust your seating depth, you're never going to have anything consistent. Say you start 10 thousandths in, by the time your barrel's done, you're going to be jumping 50 thousandths. And I don't know what to say, but changing the seating depth 50 thousandths over the life of a barrel and expecting it to keep shooting good just isn't the reality. You're going to be shooting over all of the seating depths. So if you're never going to change your seating depth at all, why even waste your time with any of this? Just load it up and go shoot and have fun. But if you want the best accuracy, I think just inside the rifling is the best place to be. Adjusting it to keep it there through the life of the barrel, I think is the place to be. And the only thing that happens is when you move your bullet forward, it opens up more room in your case here. And what happens is if there's more room in the case, then you're going to have less pressure. So every time you move the bullet forward, you have less pressure. So what do you got to do to counteract that? You got to add more powder. So for your chamber and your caliber and your bullet and everything, you're going to have to test that for yourself, how much more powder you have to add. But I found, on average, you add about 1/10 of a grain of powder every time you move the bullet about 10 thousandths. About. You know, somewhere's in that ballpark. But you have to test for yourself to make sure you keep it right in the sweet spot. So every time I move the bullet forward, I run another powder test. Most of the time it stays right in my node. I already showed you how to find a node in your powder test, and most of the time it will stay right there in the node. You don't have to change your powder. But after you've moved it out to keep up with your rifling and keep everything the same and constant, you'll have to add a little powder. But that's all you have to do. If everything else stays the same, nothing will change, and it makes it so a guy like me, I like to have this simple statement of keep it simple, stupid. So if nothing changes, the seating depth's the same, the neck tension's the same, everything is exact same, you redo your cases and bump it back the same every single time, there's nothing that's going to change. It's going to keep shooting and shooting and shooting just right for the life of the barrel. The only thing you have to do is keep up with your rifling and add a little powder once in a while. And we're probably talking, you know, not very much over the life of the barrel, you know. Talking the whole life of the barrel, a couple of thousand rounds, you're probably only going to have to add maybe a half a grain of powder over. But it's usually just 1/10 at a time, just to keep in the node. But that's pretty much my representation of, you know, my poor drawings here that I did. But I mean, there's lots of guys that jump. Lots of guys that jump. In my testing though, I haven't found anything to stay consistent. This right here, into the rifling just barely, just enough to seat it there. There's nowhere for the bullet to go besides forward. I mean, it can't go up or down and rattling around in it at all or have a crooked angle or anything. It's already in, and if with a good representation here of good neck tension, good neck clearance, and the whole 9 yards, there just adds perfect pressure for the bullet. The only place for it to go is forward. This one here, I'm not sure, you know, you're talking very tight little tolerances when you're jumping that thing. So maybe when it's engaging the rifling with the little jump there, it might not be as consistent as this. But I know a lot of guys that shoot this way, but I haven't found it to be as successful as this. And that doesn't matter if it's a hybrid bullet, if it's a target bullet, or whatever kind of bullet, whatever kind of ogive, everything I've ever tested, this has been more consistent. Now you can test for yourself and you can say it doesn't work or whatever, but for me personally, this is the way I do it. It just seems to work. Have really consistent. You know, when you go to nationals, you got to shoot 12 targets. And over the 12 targets, a lot of guys can shoot really good with this one, but over 12 targets, this one seems to be the most consistent for me personally. It doesn't matter if I'm shooting a 6mm or a 7mm, this has still been the best way to go. Now maybe other calibers, bigger bullets, maybe they don't work as well. I'm not sure, I haven't tried all those, but for what I'm shooting, this is the way to go. So I guess that's enough yapping for me. I'll see if I can do some close-ups on how my bullets sit in the case, and a little bit of representation of how tight that really is. When you're looking at your calipers, I mean, when you look at 10 thousandths, I mean, you can barely even see through there. I've had some people say that I'm shooting dangerous and all these kinds of things, and I'm blowing myself up and all this kind of stuff. Well, I mean, 10 thousandths into the lens is just barely even touching. It's just in there, just so it's not rattling around. I mean, you can barely see through there. It's just barely touching inside there. That's what I talk about being inside the rifling, that much, just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. We're not cramming it in there 50 thousandths and just, you know, and if I have to, for whatever reason, if I chamber around and I have to pull it back out because of a ceasefire or something like that, only being in 10 thousandths never sticks. It doesn't stick into the rifling. Now if you go 30 thousandths, the way some guys I hear them talking about into the rifling, then you try to extract your case, sometimes the bullet will stick into the rifling, and then you dump all your powder out. When you're trying to extract the case, your bullet sticks and the powder dumps all over in your chamber and it makes a big mess. But just 10 thousandths in, it won't do that. It'll come right back out as long as you have, you know, 1 or 2 thousandths worth of neck tension, it'll hold. You know, we're just barely touching it in there. We're not cramming it in there and forcing it in there. So it's just barely in, that's it. And you can still chamber them fast, you can shoot them fast, everything. But for me, that's much more consistent, much more accurate. But if you want to jump them, heck, that's the way every manufacturer in America makes their bullets. But personally, I just don't think it's as accurate. So not with the testing I've done. And all you guys with your worrying about the SD on their chronograph, test this compared to this. You're going to find out that this here has way more consistent SD. I mean, these are the types of things I use chronograph for. I don't use it for overall velocity. I don't use it for finding my node or anything like that. But when I'm testing between jumping a bullet and seating just in and these types of things, that's what I use a chronograph for, just to see what the numbers look like here compared to here. And just slightly into the rifling is always more consistent. Always, always, always. I get all kinds of wild SD numbers when I do it this way. Here, they come right down and look pretty good. So that's one thing I do use a chronograph for. When I'm testing between two different things, or two different powders, or, you know, I've always want to compare the difference of what's going on. But there's some good things about a chronograph, that you can learn some good information, but not for finding your node. I don't think it's helpful at all for finding a node. But if you found your node and you're comparing different velocities and things like that for overall, I think it works pretty good. So but this here representation, just slightly in, everything's more consistent, everything's more accurate. It just shoots way better for me. So hopefully that helps explain some of that stuff. Probably forgot more stuff, but I'll take some more close-ups for you, so hopefully you can see what I'm talking about. Thanks. Keep your group small.